Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Clocked In with the Press, hosted at Altman Studios in Brentwood, California. In this podcast, we highlight members and organizations in the community that we believe deserve your attention. Not everything stated in this podcast is supported by or reflects the beliefs of the press. If you would like to share your thoughts, you can do so on Twitter or Instagram at PressClockedIn or on Facebook at thepress.net. This is your host, Kaitlyn Gleason, clocking in. For today's episode, seeing as it is New Year's Eve, we are going to recap 2021 by talking about both national and local news from January to December. Here with me today to help with the recap is staff writer Jake Menez. Hey, Jake.
Hey.
So we're going to go ahead and just start off with January. We're going to bring up a national story and then a local story. The January 6th insurrection is probably my national story because we're still having to deal with it here in December. And it was a wild way to start off the year.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that there's any story that has that same amount of gravity, just in terms of airplay.
Yeah, maybe the murder hornets of 2020. Okay, but then also in terms of a local story, is a story that I found to be interesting from, the press archives was how we had a Liberty alumni, Delaney Sheehan, actually drafted into professional women's soccer. I believe in New Jersey, the Sky Blue FC. So that was pretty cool.
The Garden State.
The Garden State. But February, what do you have for national?
I was going to say, going back to, kind of linking your national and local stories for January, there was that story in the press archives from January, was it 15th? That there had been someone from Brentwood at the...
right. Yeah, we had a local event. Guy who was there at the insurrection. And we had a story about it.
Our producer, Brian, has a shocked look on his face, but it is true. You can go to our site and read all about it. I think he was a Heritage graduate. If I recall correctly.
I think so. It was pretty wild, too, because I didn't even know it, and then I was just kind of reading through the January papers, and I found it.
Right, for context, you joined the press in...
June.
And I joined... I had been freelancing for a few years, but I joined officially back in August. So this was before our time that the story...
Yeah, so
ran.
What a way to tell people that I definitely didn't read the press before I worked for that.
I did, but it's like, just the onslaught of news that you get, it's easy to forget sometimes.
That actually gives us a good chance to mention this to people is if you haven't, you should download our app, thepress.net, because you'll be able to get push notifications and you'll be able to just always be reminded when there's a new news story. Also, all of our breaking news does immediately go to your notification center on your lock screen if you have it set up. So if you would like to stay updated on a lot of the stuff that happens in East Contra Costa County, then that's probably one of the better ways to do it because our app is free. You get complete access to everything on the website, and you get to just do it from your own mobile device.
It's on all phones, Android and Apple.
Yeah. But going back to the topics at hand, though, let's go to February. So for national news, I am a football fan, so I'm going to bring up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning Super Bowl 55 against the Kansas Chiefs. And I always thought it was very wild because the score was 31-9, and the Chiefs didn't score a single touchdown the whole game. I was like, dang, that's rough.
Not a football guy. I like some of the commercials. I thought Bruce Springsteen's commercial kind of sucked, but I'm a big fan of the boss.
You go to watch the Super Bowl only for the halftime show?
No, I'll go to someone's house for snacks and I'll watch the commercials on YouTube later sometimes.
No, my family is the type where we will make an entire football stadium out of food. The wall is made of Twinkies. The field is guacamole. It's pretty fun.
That is an interesting combination.
See, but it's like a whole thing. We actually one time built a wooden frame to make the stands. It's pretty cool, the crowd is a mix of Skittles and Reese's Pieces. And
is there Pepto-Bismol somewhere in the mix?
No.
Maybe some of the fans can be Tums, maybe, I don't know.
No, there's not. Okay, but local news.
Contra Costa County District Attorney Diane Becton issued a statement regarding California Supreme Court decision to uphold the constitutionality of Senate Bill 1391. She stated that the bill, which addressed the rehabilitation for juvenile crimes, was key to reform the current justice system and change the way children who commit crimes are treated by it.
Oh, yeah, because that one just affected the way in which minors are actually dealt with by the system. Right. Instead of being we're going to try you in this particular way. It focused more on changing behavior, which I think was relatively controversial.
Well, the interesting thing about it, I don't want to get too into the weeds of that because we've got, 10 more months to cover, but there's something like that, where a change in behavior would be good for, a reduction in recidivism, people that are repeat offenders.
Yeah,
essentially.
it was kind of that carrot versus stick debate about whether or not rehabilitation was better than punishment. But so far it's been upheld here in Contra Costa County. But moving on to March, for national ones, there was like a list of bad things that happened. It was a rough month. March was a rough month for 2021. But the thing that I kind of noticed was that within the same week, or within the same like 4-day period, there were 3 different shootings that happened. One was the Atlanta massage parlor shooting that sparked the Stop Asian Hate movement. That was on the 17th. And then on March 19th, we had a shooting in the Dallas nightclub. And then on the 21st, we had the King Soopers shooting in Boulder, and they killed at least 10 people. So in like the same week, there was like just this large increase of shootings that were happening within the month of March, which was very wild for people who were kind of just following along with that news pathing, at least.
I'm realizing, listening to all this, just what a long year it was. Like, so many of these stories I'm seeing feel like they happened, last year.
They really
did. This has just been, just such a long couple of years.
That's like the January 6th insurrection. When I was debating on doing this episode, Brian is the one that reminded me that...
Brian Altman, our producer here at Altman Studios.
Yes, the producer here at Altman Studios in Brentwood, California. But he's the one that reminded me that the insurrection was this year. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's just, oh man.
You're like, that, yeah, it's still the same year as that.
Time is an illusion.
It's subjective. All right, but locally though, the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors in March modified its moratorium on hemp cultivation. I think part of the reason why I thought this might have been like, one of the top stories for March locally is just because it really changed, the amount of production of hemp, but 2, a lot of businesses use hemp in like the non-recreational way, where it's for clothing, and it's replacement for cotton and medical.
Right. I mean,
like
hemp comes from the same
stuff.
plant, but hemp is not the same as.
It's not the same as marijuana. No, it's a different
distinction.
Yeah, I think they say hemp is a different like gender than the marijuana strand, is the way that it's been explained to me.
And it's typically more environmentally conscious than stuff like cotton as well, but that's something I'm not going to get into right now.
Oh, man. Okay, talking about April, though. Let's go to the April story.
Funny enough, speaking of April 20th, on April 20th of this year, protests continued in Minnesota as Derek Chauvin was found guilty on 3 counts of murder for the death of George Floyd.
That was a big deal.
And again, it feels like it happened so long ago.
It feels like it was 2020. But I mean, that was... Because that whole issue started in 2020 and then ended in 2021.
Yeah, I mean...
So it was just kind of like did it? Right. I remember that. I remember because a lot of people that I knew were debating about going to the protests, but they couldn't because of COVID. Because they were worried about it. Okay, but... April 2021 locally is a story that I found that I thought was really great, was how the Antioch community actually came together to help a person named Adrian Rodriguez, who was a toddler diagnosed with stage 4 leukemia. And so they held a fundraiser in the community center on April 3rd to kind of help fund the kid's care and his medical bills and things like that. And I was like, I think it was a really nice uplifting story to find, because I feel like 2021 was full of a lot of bad. And so finding this story about the community coming together to try and just help fund the medical care of someone suffering from cancer, I was like, you know what, that's a really good story. So that's gonna be my top local story for April.
All right, and I think that's, one of the challenges, as we're doing a year in review is, a lot of both things happen, a lot of good and a lot of bad. But I mean, why end the year strictly on a bummer note when you can find some nice stuff that happened?
Yeah. So then moving on to May, is nationally, this also was a little bit internationally, but I remember it being a really big deal, is how President Biden waived sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 Russian pipeline, which was, I think, at that point already like 95% complete. And a lot of people had problems with it just because, it's Russia. Everyone's really sensitive about Russia for good reason, mostly. So yeah, that was kind of the big story that I remember from May of 2021. But locally is one of the top stories there was that there was a request for funding being submitted by a coalition of Contra Costa County fire chiefs for the Measure X Community Advisory Board. Basically, it was said that it would double the number of fire stations serving East County within the next 5 years. And the follow-up to that is eventually the consolidation was agreed upon by ECC, FPD, and Con Fire. So this way they would be able to increase the amount of fire stations that we actually had in this area. Okay, so June.
Yeah, June's a little bit of a reversal in the sense that your national story is, good news in the sense that where Juneteenth was made a national holiday, which is great. But I mean, locally, the community mourned the loss of track star Matthias Rogers.
Yeah, no, that was really rough, actually, because June was the month that I joined. And for the loss of Matthias Rogers, I actually remember I covered that story, and it was the first front cover story that I've ever had. And that was just really hard. Because I remember a week before the death of Matthias Rogers, I was at Liberty High School, taking photos of all these kids graduating. They're all celebrating the start of the rest of their lives. And then a week later, I'm at that same football field documenting the vigil for Matthias Rogers. And I was like, dang, this is rough. But I remember a lot of the community was impacted by that because he was just a really nice kid who just knew a lot of people. And
not to be morose, but since you're the one who covered it, do you want to refresh anybody on what exactly the meat of that story is?
Yeah, so basically what happened was there were two cars driving on one of those, single lane roads in opposite directions. And then the car that Matthias was in suddenly swerved across the road, and it just was a head-on collision. And then Matthias, he passed away on that site. And then I think the other two people, so the kid who was like 19 years old in the other car, and then his friend who was in the passenger seat, they both are alive, but they both had to go through a lot of medical procedures, and it was really, really hard. And so we don't know, as the press, we don't know the details about why the car swerved or kind of what happened there. But basically, there was just a really big car accident, and Matthias passed away, and then the whole community came together to mourn his loss because so many people had been impacted by him. So yeah, it was a really rough moment for the community, but at the same time, everybody kind of came together, and it was really a big show of support for each other. And I was like, well, it's very bittersweet in how all of that was.
So moving on to July, though, nationally, you had that condo building collapse in Florida, and it was Surfside specifically. Over 97 people died. We did I'm jumping ahead before I do the local story, but locally we did have someone from Oakley who assisted with that situation.
One of our firemen was actually called out to go help with the search and rescue.
Yeah, Jeff Quinnell. But I wrote the story on him back in September. It took a while to get a hold of him just because
he was busy.
Yeah, just all the red tape.
He was a little preoccupied.
As well.
But yeah, so then locally, we there were kind of two main big things that happened because this was also during fire season. So one was that we had about 5 acres of Vasco that were burned in a vegetation fire, but we were able to get it snuffed out before too much damage was done. And then the other one is that indoor masking policies were reinstituted because we all had like a little taste of freedom without the mask for like a month, and then they reinstituted it. Yeah, that was disappointing, but yeah. But for August, nationally, kind of international, but
very international.
Very international, but definitely the biggest story of that month was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, because a lot happened because of that. We had 13 U.S. soldiers who died. I think one of the soldiers actually was from this area. I don't think this county, but definitely this area. I believe they were from Sacramento.
Yeah, in greater Northern California area.
Yeah, in Northern California. And so there was that problem with Afghanistan, and the withdrawal just had a big impact, and a lot of people had a lot to say about it. But locally...
Well, first off, locally, our dear friend of the paper, Jake Menez, joins the staff officially. I don't know where that ticker tape parade is. I'm still waiting on it. But beyond that, the other local news, the bigger local news, was that local deputy Matthew Gauthier was declared innocent following the death of 41-year-old Paul Ridgway during an encounter in Martinez in 2018. It was determined that Ridgway was lawfully shot after Ridgway pulled a handgun and fired at point-blank range following a struggle between the two.
Yeah, I do remember talking about that story, I think, in Top Stories earlier this year, too, just because, first of all, it was such a long time to figure out if the deputy was innocent or not. But also, I think when the original altercation happened, that was also in the middle of some of the Black Lives Matter protests. And so people were kind of really focusing on making sure that justice was able to prevail, whether it be that Gauthier was innocent or guilty.
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, you follow the trajectory of all of that, and it certainly, all ties together at the end of the day.
Pretty much, yeah. But going to September now, nationally, there were kind of two main stories that I found. The first one's international. I don't know. I love international news, so I feel like there are certain things that are important to say, especially since this is a follow-up with August, is when it came to Afghanistan. You saw there was this continuous rise of Taliban policies, specifically about how over 20% of the workforce in Afghanistan was forced to stay home because they were women, and women judges were actually told to stay home, and the Taliban ended up releasing the criminals that those women judges had imprisoned. So there was this whole thing in Afghanistan about the way that the Taliban was just reworking the policies in the country. And I just remember everybody was talking about it. That and a lot of the Christians in the country were being persecuted. And then a lot of families were trying to get out and the Taliban wasn't letting them. It was a mess.
It was a whole thing.
Yeah, it was a whole thing. And so the second story, however, the national one, is the Amtrak train derailment in Montana that ended up taking 3 lives. This one was not only big because train derailments don't happen that often, but even just for me, I actually knew one of the people who'd passed away through that. And it was just a crazy event that happened. And I know that Amtrak is still, I think, in legal battles with some of the people who sued them. But locally, we can definitely turn it to a more positive note, is that the Antioch High School alumni ended up debuting in the NFL. Najee Harris and Isaiah Dunn, Najee Harris being with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Isaiah Dunn being with the New York Jets. They both had their debuts in the NFL, which we were all just super pumped about because we had people in the Professional Football League.
Moving on to October, I think the big national story that's still getting a lot of traction just because it's still, the fallout from it is still being dealt with, is the shooting on the set of Rust, that Western that Alec Baldwin's starring in.
Right. Yeah, that was a wild story. I remember, I think I was just sitting at work and I was, scrolling through news headlines and reading things, and I saw it and I was like, whoa, what?
It's right. I think it was the cinematographer, Helena Hutchins, who ended up passing away, of course, but there were other injuries as well.
Yeah, and I remember being very confused because I always thought they used prop guns that weren't capable of killing people.
We're supposed to have blanks. I mean, the whole thing is they're supposed to be blanks that, the bullets look like they're firing, but nothing comes out. And the gun was loaded with real bullets, obviously.
Right. And so, I don't know. And in my head, I always thought that people just used, fake guns that didn't actually have the propensity to fire a bullet at all. So when that all happened, I was really surprised. And didn't they later on say that the original weapons controller of the Rust set said that he left the set because they had really, really bad gun safety or something?
Correct. And there were a lot of strike issues involved as well, because this was during that whole period of time. But I mean, it's something that happens, unfortunately, pretty frequently, like Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow, for example, back in the 90s, I believe.
So, there are armorers on set for any movie that is working with guns. The armorers are in charge of inspecting the firearms and ensuring that they are safe to use. And there is a chain of custody for these weapons to make sure that optimal safety is the optimal safety protocols are followed. So Alec Baldwin was given this gun by someone other than the armorer. Alec Baldwin held the gun up, pointed it at this lady, cocked pulled the hammer back, and had his finger on the trigger. And he says that when he released the hammer, the gun fired. But he was already pointing it at this lady, and already they had broken the chain of proper custody of the weapons. So this sounds really, really bad for Alec.
Those sultry tones, of course, belong to our producer Brian Altman, who's jumping in here with some great info. The other interesting thing, though, is Baldwin was on He gave an appearance recently on TV and he was like, "Oh, it wasn't my fault. It was someone else's fault."
Well, obviously, he's going to say it's not his fault. He stands to lose millions of dollars, and probably, potentially go to jail for manslaughter. But yeah, no, I just remember like the safety was just not there, because you're supposed to. First of all, you're never supposed to point a gun at somebody. Like, that's rule number 1 of gun safety. But second of all, if for some reason you have to, you're supposed to check it and fire at the ground or somewhere else before you fire it at a person, because you don't know if it's loaded or not, or you check if it's loaded. So the whole thing, I was like, my guy, like, how can you be on a show all about guns and not know a single thing about the proper way to handle a gun?
Alec Baldwin has a reputation of being a bit of a hothead. There was already tons of issues on the set of Rust. People were quitting. People were saying they weren't being paid properly. There were a lot of safety protocols that weren't being followed all over the place. And during that interview, he actually incriminated himself when he said that he wasn't responsible. He tried to blame the armorer. The thing is he actually said that it didn't come from the armorer. It came from somebody else, and he shouldn't have even handled it if it came from somebody else. I mean, he literally incriminated himself on national television.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw really quick here just because I don't, this is a story that I know, I want to talk a lot more about, but I know just for time constraints, I can throw it to you for the local story for October, which is Hometown Halloween.
Yeah, the local story was just Hometown Halloween. I think it was one of the first big events that Brentwood really had since, the start of COVID. Everybody was really excited to kind of get back into the swing of things, before we had to reinstitute mask policies in December. But yeah, no, Hometown Halloween was really, really nice. A lot of the kids had fun. The press was there to able to report on it. And then I think that year we were able to see a lot of kids able to go out and do trick-or-treating in like a safe way, because people all over the different Facebook groups of the town were just sharing different ways to pass out candy in a safe way, be it with Ziploc bags or hand sanitizer or things like that. So it was kind of just like a nice moment locally, despite the national news. The eye of the storm. Hometown Halloween. I dressed as that one meme, like with the lady in the pink jacket, and she's like squatting over and squinting. That was my Halloween outfit. So November, our national story is unfortunately another tragedy that happened was Astro World. At least 10 people died and hundreds of people were injured. And I remember when Travis Scott posted his apology video, everybody was like super mad because it was one of the worst apology videos like ever. But that was a really rough festival, because I've personally been to festivals and I've been in the mosh pits, and it can get really scary, but the idea of what those people had to go through was absolutely terrifying.
Right. And again, that's another story that, there's not much more I can say about it. But Brian, do you have any thoughts?
It's not the first time that harm has come to an audience attending a concert. I recall even back in the 90s when I can't remember the name of the club, but Great White was playing and the club burned down and killed a lot of people in a fire. And the reason that issues happen at concerts is negligence. People get hurt when people are negligent and aren't concerned for the safety of the people around them. So as someone who has attended many, many concerts, I would say if you see somebody fall, pick them up and have fun, dance, have a great time. Don't try and hurt the people around you. And if you see somebody hurting, help them. Don't laugh at them. Come on now.
Yeah, it sums up pretty much the best way to deal with
great
concerts.
advice, yeah.
Okay, so locally we have Ruben Padilla, who is an alumni of one of the local schools. I don't remember which one. He was at the 2021 Trampoline Gymnastics World Championships. I believe he got second place. He got silver. He was just 2.5 points behind the gold medal winner Vasily Makarsky of Russia. And then also Padilla was a member of the team that finished fourth in the double mini trampoline with Alexander Renkert and the Changameyer Anderson. And they also finished sixth in the synchronized trampoline event. So he actually did really, really well. And That's like really impressive, actually, when I think about gymnastics and trampoline gymnastics, because I can't even do a front flip on a trampoline. I always land on my back.
I'll tell you this. They add the bounce house to the trampoline events. I'm there. I'm getting gold.
You're like, no one else wins at the bounce house.
Hell, put a couple kids on the bounce house with me as well. I'll bounce around them, do a flip.
Okay, we'll make sure to send some letter to the gymnastics committee and be like, you have to have a bounce house event.
You go take it to the top.
You.
Olympics committee, are you listening?
All right, so December. In December, the national story, the one that I noticed that became really, really big really recently was the TikTok viral challenge problem of the school violence threats. Basically, for anybody who didn't know about it, is there was this whole challenge that went out about committing school violence, such as, bombings or shootings or things like that, on December 17th. And they said that they would do it from East Coast to West Coast. And then I believe that it said, quote, not even elementary schools will be spared. And there was this whole problem, and a lot of local law enforcement was, taking the necessary precautions, and the local school districts were as well. Thankfully, nothing happened. At least locally. I'm not sure nationally if anybody tried anything elsewhere, but I know locally nothing happened, and we were all really, really thankful for that.
Yeah, and locally, I have to say the schools and the law enforcement agencies were pretty proactive about getting information to parents, teachers.
Oh yeah, they sent an email beforehand. They were like, this is happening. I know a lot of parents didn't even send their kids to school that day. Understandably, I wouldn't have either. But yeah, so that was one of the national things that happened. And then locally, might be a little biased on my part, but there were just a lot of stories of nonprofits and donations and events, and if you're ever interested in looking at these nonprofits, you can go to the press link tree at Press Clocked In, and you can go ahead and donate to any of them. Because there were a lot. There were a lot of people coming together for the holidays. We had the Brentwood Regional Community Chest. We had the VCRC. We just had a lot of people coming together to try and help others during the holiday season.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
If these nonprofits, if there was someone who's interested in hearing the people speak about the nonprofits in an audio format, perhaps while driving so I can while jogging and driving my car, is there some sort of maybe podcast in which I could do such a thing?
Well, it's great that you ask. So there's this podcast called Clocked In with the Press. And it talks about local nonprofits and organizations that like to have their own events or campaigns in order to help particular communities, such as the homeless community, women and children, the Latino community, or even just general people who are in need of help in the one particular moment. And so if you're interested in hearing about that, make sure you tune in every single week on Friday at 6 a.m., starting at 6 a.m. The episode is available after 6 a.m. if you sleep in late. And you can go ahead and listen in to learn more about these organizations.
This is a little bit more national, I think.
For sure.
And we're going to turn to Spider-Man. Is he a menace? At the box office. No, I think it is an interesting national story that, of course, box office has been, for movies, I'm a big movie guy, but, the box office has been very lackluster since, March 2020, obviously with the pandemic. It's, the movie opened with the second biggest, opening weekend in history, right behind Avengers Endgame, which is, of course, in that same family of movies. It had 260 million, opening weekend domestically. It's in the States.
I think internationally it hit 600 million.
And I think the one thing that people don't always factor in for stuff like that is inflation. So, just as inflation happens, these opening weekends get bigger and bigger, and they seem more impressive. But if you were to take an older movie and adjust it for inflation, it would, the disparity isn't quite as big as you're thinking.
Well, considering that somewhere between 40 and 50% of dollars that exist were printed in the last year, yes, this could be a significant factor, Jake.
But I just throwing to an example here, Spider-Man 3, which one of my favorite movies that I know everybody else seems to not like. In 2007, that one had an opening weekend of 151 million. If you were to, just that to today dollars, it'd be just over 200 million. So it's, the gap there between that. And this one isn't that significant. So it's just, I think that's something worth considering as well. So it's impressive. Oh, sorry.
I was going to go completely off topic. Not completely. I was going to say that the bar scene in Spider-Man 3, to this day, I cannot watch it.
I watched Spider-Man 3 over the weekend. All three of the Spider-Man films are currently streaming on Peacock. I'm not doing an ad for them. They are not paying me this. I watched all three of them. Fantastic. Spider-Man 3 is so fun. I love it so much.
I can't. The secondhand embarrassment.
Oh, that's the point.
Okay,
He's a dork.
I can physically feel the embarrassment of that scene, so I can't watch it.
Kaitlyn, oh my God, that's the point of the scene. Spider-Man's been corrupted. Spoiler alert, Spider-Man's been corrupted by an evil alien.
Spoiler alert of a 2007 movie.
An evil alien that makes him more sinister. But he's a big nerd. It's his whole thing. So the sinister version of him, just a bigger nerd who thinks he's a cool guy. It's fantastic.
Basically.
He showed his little James Brown dance. Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
So
Only Sam Raimi could have pulled off a scene like that.
That's exactly, oh gosh, I love Sam Raimi. What a guy.
TLDR, Jake says that if you're a nerd, you can't get cooler. You can only become a bigger nerd.
Oh no, you can't be sinister. That's my whole thing.
Wait, don't all of the best sinister villains, like, aren't they super smart?
But they're not nerds. They're not dorks.
Okay, fair enough.
Lex Luthor, smart guy, not a dork. Jeff Bezos, smart guy, evil, not a dork though.
Elon Musk.
Huge, okay. Dweeb, not dork.
Semantics.
What is the difference?
We're going to start wrapping it up here. I think we're probably overlong anyway.
All right, Jake, before I end the show and we move into the next year, is there anything else you would like to say? Brian, you too.
Thank you, everybody, for listening this year. It's been a real blast working with the press on this podcast. And with Kaitlyn and Jake in particular, you guys have done such a great job. Kaitlyn, you've put so many hours into this. Really proud of you for what you've been able to accomplish. Thank you so much to the press for letting me be a part of this. And thank you, community, for listening in. And we hope to continue to develop this show to be something even more entertaining and informative for you in 2022.
If any of these stories, local ones in particular, interested you, a reminder again, thepress.net, a website, an app, and a beautiful paper that comes out every Friday as well. Subscribe to any of those things.
Y'all are taking my outro from me.
And also, we love you.
But yeah, no, thank you both for, being on the show. Brian, for interjecting with your very, very knowledgeable information about the Alec Baldwin shooting.
I don't know much, but I know Alec.
The boss baby himself.
But yes, thank you both so much. Brian, thank you for having the press over in your studio. I know that, this wouldn't be the same podcast if it was me in a room by myself with a $30 mic trying to make things work. So thank you for making me sound smart all these times. I know it's difficult.
It's not that tough, Kaitlyn. I'm not going to let you walk off with that one.
Okay.
You're a smart girl. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to listen to this episode. I appreciate you taking your time to listen, and I hope you will continue to do so in 2022. I also hope that you will continue on to have a marvelous year filled with happiness, accomplishments, and peace. Make sure you check out our website at www.thepress.net, as Jake said, and keep up with our social media on Twitter or Instagram at PressClockedIn. That is all that we have for today, and I will speak with you all next year. This is your host, Kaitlyn Gleason, clocking out.